You're listening to this on a quiet night. Maybe it's after a long day, when the sounds of the world begin to fade, and all that's left is you, alone with thoughts you haven't yet laid down. Or maybe you've just stepped out of a stormy day, not outside, but inside your heart. And now you're looking for a place to rest, not just your body, but your soul. If that's the case, then welcome. This story is for you. A story about a night long ago, and yet it carries something very near. About a small boat, some men who knew the sea well, and a teacher, unlike anyone they had ever met. A night when the wind rose without warning, and the waves towered higher than their courage. But also, a night when a voice, softer than the wind, brought the whole world to stillness. A night when frightened men learned something greater than any storm, that there is one who never leaves them, not even in the fiercest tempest. Jesus. That one is Jesus. But before the storm arrived, everything began in peace. The evening skies over Galilee held a beauty all their own. The surface of the water was streaked with fading sunlight, like a blurred golden mirror reflecting slow-drifting clouds. Birds called softly in the distance, and a breeze from the far shore carried the earthy scent of freshly cut grass, sharp, yet comforting. Jesus and his disciples had just stepped away from the crowd on the shore, after a long day of teaching and healing. Some people lingered, still reluctant to leave, some even following as the sun disappeared. But Jesus turned to his disciples and told them to cross to the other side of the lake. No one asked why. They were used to sudden departures, used to not knowing the destination, yet always feeling safe as long as he was with them. These men were not all the same. Some had been fishermen, with rough hands and eyes trained to read the water's mood. Some, like former tax collectors, were better with numbers than with oars. Some were hot-tempered, some quiet, some constantly questioning. But there was one thing that bound them together: Jesus. They had left everything to follow him. Not because he promised them glory, but because when he looked at them, they felt truly known. The boat pushed off from shore. Twilight hadn't fully settled. The Sea of Galilee stretched like a sheet of black silk, slowly catching the shimmer of stars. In the dimming light, the oars dipped and pulled in rhythm, creating a soft, steady music, like breathing. Jesus sat at the stern, quietly gazing out into the distance. A few disciples chatted softly. Others leaned against the sides of the boat, their eyes on the moonlight rippling on the water. There were light laughs, shared stories, and whispers recalling the lessons their teacher had spoken along the way. A fragile, precious peace, one that no one imagined would be taken from them within the hour. But then, from the west, the sky began to change. A thick streak of cloud, dark as smoke, stretched across the horizon. The wind shifted, so fast it sent the small lantern at the boat's bow swaying wildly. And in that moment, everyone felt it. A quiet but violent shift, like the very soul of the lake had awakened. The storm was coming. When the wind began to rise, first no one said a word. It was just a sudden chill sweeping across the lake, making a few of them shiver. Wind on Galilee wasn't rare, and those who'd lived their whole lives by this lake, like Peter or Andrew, knew. When the wind comes like that, out of place, it usually means something else is coming too. For a few minutes, the boat kept gliding, the only sound the water slapping more urgently against the sides. But then, the wind began to howl, as if some invisible force had broken loose, racing across the surface, whipping at faces, tugging at hair, chilling the heart. Oars wobbled. The small sail was rolled up in a hurry. Peter stood first, trying to calm the others, but his own hands were shaking, not from the cold, but because he saw what the others hadn't yet. The waves rising in the distance, dark and thick, like massive creatures charging toward them. A rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. The lake was no longer a mirror. It had shattered, each wave breaking like a jagged piece of glass, crashing water onto their faces, their clothes, their hearts. One disciple yelled for everyone to grab hold. Shouts overlapped. "Watch the side! Hold the left! Pull the rope! Where's Jesus? Has anyone seen him?" And then, in the chaos, in the wind's shriek and the slap of waves, someone turned and saw him. Jesus was sleeping. He lay at the stern of the boat, his head resting on a rough cushion, face calm, untouched by the storm. The wind didn't stir him. The waves couldn't wake him. In the wildest moment of the night, he was the most peaceful one on board. That peace disturbed them more than the storm. "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" The words weren't just fear of death. It was the cry of people reaching their breaking point, the end of strength, of control, of faith. They didn't blame him for sleeping, they blamed the silence. While they struggled, he rested. While they cried out, he remained still. And then, he opened his eyes. No one ever forgot that look. No panic, no rush, no fear. He rose, slowly, while the boat rocked so violently others could barely stand. His robe clung to him, soaked, but it didn't take away the quiet power in his presence. He turned to the sea. The wind pushed against him like a dare. The waves kept slamming against the boat, as if trying to swallow them all. And then, something happened. He raised his hand and spoke. Not a shout, but a sentence soft enough for all to hear. "Peace, be still." That was it. One sentence, gentler than thunder, quieter than waves, but stronger than both. And as if heaven and earth recognized the one who spoke, the wind stopped. The waves settled like scolded children. In a breath, the surface of Galilee stilled, smooth again, as if none of it had ever happened. No sound, not even a whisper, only stillness, so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. The disciples looked at each other. Their eyes stayed on Jesus, but their fear had changed. It was no longer fear of dying. It was holy fear, a sacred awe. They whispered among themselves, as if afraid to speak too loud. "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" But Jesus turned, looking at each one of them, and asked, "Why are you afraid? Where is your faith?" No one answered, not because they had no words, but because they didn't yet understand what had just happened. But one thing was clear. They lived. They were saved, not by their strength, but by the one who could calm even the storm. And that night, on a lake that had just survived a storm, something miraculous happened. They began to learn how to believe. One word and the great question. After Jesus calmed the storm, everything settled down miraculously. The wind stopped, the waves calmed, The surface of the Sea of Galilee was now a mirror reflecting the faint glow of the moon. The stars twinkled like jewels on the dark fabric of the night. Only the sound of the gentle wind and the soft splash of water against the boat remained. The disciples sat in silence, no one daring to speak. They looked at Jesus with an expression of bewilderment. It was a moment of prolonged silence, a moment in which all the chaotic emotions seemed to vanish. But one great question echoed in each of their minds. Who is this? A question they could not ignore. A question that kept resounding in their minds, etched in every gaze they cast upon Jesus. Who could do this? Who could command the wind and the waves to obey? Could an ordinary man do such a thing? And if he were not an ordinary man, then who was he? Who could have such power? Jesus did not answer the question immediately. He turned to look at them, his gaze calm, as though he knew the question would come. He didn't respond with words, but simply with a small question. Why are you afraid? Where is your faith? With that one question, Jesus stirred something deep within them. These men, who had witnessed so many miracles, who had lived with their teacher for so long, were now facing a storm and had forgotten their faith. They were afraid, not because they didn't believe Jesus could save them, but because they had never truly understood the depth of their faith. They hadn't really trusted in their own ability to endure in the protection of Jesus. That was when they realized it wasn't the storm outside that was the most terrifying. Sometimes, the real storm is within the heart. The storm of doubt, the storm of fear, the storm of not trusting in themselves, in what they had witnessed, in the power of the love that Jesus had for them. They sat there in silence until Jesus spoke again. Trust in me. I am here. I am always here. A promise not loud in its declaration, but one that could soothe every pain in their hearts. That promise, gentle yet profound, was like a cool stream flowing through the dry stones within them. They began to feel the peace, not just in the space around them, but deep within their own souls. The night had grown late. The dark clouds slowly dissipated, revealing a brilliant night sky, as if all their fears had been swept away. Jesus sat down beside them, and this time no one was afraid. The whole boat was still, with no sound except the soft waves lapping against the side. They didn't know what to do next. They no longer knew what to ask. They simply sat together next to Jesus, feeling this peace. The peace wasn't because the storm had passed, but because they realized that, even if a storm comes, Jesus is still there. And when He is there is nothing to fear. Chapter 3 of this story ended in a gentle peace. But what the disciples experienced on that boat wasn't over. They would face other challenges, other storms in their lives. But through this night, they had learned one important thing. It's not that we are not to fear because the storm won't come, but because when the teacher is with us, we will always have peace. A new morning, transformation after the storm. As dawn began to break, the soft light lifted the veil of night and shimmered on the surface of the Sea of Galilee. The storm had passed, but it left a profound mark on the hearts of those sitting in the boat. Although the surface of the water was now calm, everything seemed to have changed. It was not just the water's surface, but the way they saw the world, themselves, and Jesus. Jesus said nothing more after his final question. He sat down, continuing in silence, but this silence was not cold. It was a silence full of strength, like a comfort, like a promise that he would always be there, even without words. A new morning had begun, but for those in the boat, everything had changed. It was not only an external change, but a change within their hearts. Each person reflected quietly, questioning what had happened during the night, about themselves, about Jesus, about the faith they had never truly understood. Peter was the first to speak after the prolonged silence. He turned to Jesus, his eyes still filled with a hint of surprise, but now with a much deeper, more thoughtful expression. "Who are you?" Peter asked, a question that he himself wasn't sure he could answer. Jesus looked at Peter, then at all the disciples. He smiled, a gentle smile full of meaning, as if he knew that no words could fully explain his mystery. "Who am I? I am the one you will understand when you truly believe. Not just seeing miracles, but seeing love in every action of mine," he said, his voice steady, but full of encouragement. Jesus' answer was not clear, but it was very clear to those who truly listened. Sometimes, it is not the clear answers, but the questions and actions of Jesus that help them find the way. The disciples sat down, each one reflecting on what Jesus had just said. They knew that, through this journey, they had learned not only about his power, but also about the unconditional love and patience he showed them. The group didn't speak much for the rest of the morning. They just continued to row, but their souls were lighter, more at peace. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within their hearts was just beginning to calm. They were learning to see life's challenges and storms not as things to avoid, but as opportunities to experience Jesus' presence, to see that he was always with them, even in their moments of greatest uncertainty. Gradually, the surface of the water returned to its peaceful state. The dark clouds had faded away, and the sunlight shone down, reflecting off the water like bright mirrors. The world outside seemed to greet them with a fresh peace. But for the disciples, the true change had happened inside them. "Follow me," Jesus said, turning to look at them. This time, he didn't ask them if they believed. He simply spoke, honest and sincere. It was an invitation to walk with him, not to escape the storms, but to go through them with him, and to learn the lessons of faith, the peace that only he could provide. The disciples looked at one another, then turned their gaze to Jesus. They didn't say anything, but within each of them, a change had begun. A change not caused by the miracles outside, but by what they felt within themselves, the peace that Jesus brought, not from the absence of storms, but from having him beside them. And they knew that no matter how the storms may come, they would never have to face them alone again. Chapter 4 ends in deep, abiding peace. For the disciples, the journey was not just about passing through the great waves, but also about moving through moments of quiet reflection. Each day, they learned a little more about faith, about Jesus' presence in their lives. But the journey continued, with many challenges and new lessons waiting ahead. The stranger's procession, lessons from the storms within. The sun was high in the sky, and the warm golden light of the morning spread across the surface of the Sea of Galilee. The disciples' boat was now near the shore, where they would continue their journey. Though the storm had passed outside, within each person, another storm arose, gentle yet no less powerful. Jesus turned to look at them, his gaze filled with love, not hurried but gentle, as though he knew a part of their hearts was still immersed in unanswered questions. "What do you think of the storm?" Jesus asked, but not to elicit an immediate response. He wanted them to reflect on what had happened, not just on the sea, but within their very souls. The disciples were silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the storm. Some looked at each other, but no one spoke. They all understood that this was not just a simple question. The storm was not only about the wind and waves, but also about what we face inside ourselves. The storms of doubt, of fear, of difficult decisions, and the challenges of life. Jesus understood this, and he did not press them for an immediate answer. He simply allowed them time to feel and realize that no matter what storm may come, if he was by their side, they would never be swept away. "I ask you this," he continued, "because I want you to understand that the storms in life will never disappear, but what you learn through the storm will make you stronger. And you will know that, whether there is a storm or not, as long as I am with you, you will never fear." Once again, no one spoke, but now, their gazes were no longer filled with confusion. They were filled with peace. They knew that, though there were still many things beyond their comprehension, one thing was certain. Jesus was always present, and he would never leave them. The boat gradually reached the shore, and as they stepped onto the land, they carried with them not just a lesson about peace amidst the storm, but a change within their hearts. A lesson they could not yet speak aloud, but could feel with every step they took. As they set foot on the soft sand, an unusual sight appeared before their eyes. Though they had left the storm behind, they couldn't help but notice that, in this life, they would encounter storms not only from nature but from people. People who did not understand them, people unfamiliar with their faith, people who came with big questions they did not yet have answers to. A large crowd stood waiting on the shore, villagers from the surrounding areas, looking at Jesus with expectant eyes. They had heard about him, about the miracles, and about his authoritative teachings. But some came with doubts, with hearts that had not yet fully opened. Some expected a miracle, some had come to test him, and others came with pain that seemed incurable. Jesus looked at them for a moment, then turned to the disciples. "These are the storms you will face next," he said. "Not all of them will come seeking peace, but your mission is to bring peace to them, whether they accept it or not." At that moment, the disciples felt a stir in their hearts. The storms were not only coming from nature, but also from restless hearts, from people not yet ready to accept the peace of Jesus. Could they do what he wanted of them? Jesus knew that peace would not always be immediately accepted by everyone. But he also knew that every time they faced the storms within others, they would grow stronger, more mature, and closer to him. Chapter 5 ends in an atmosphere of deep reflection and peace. The disciples had mentally prepared themselves to face the upcoming challenges on their journey with Jesus. It was not just the storms outside, but the storms within people, to whom they would have to bring peace. Facing the storms of the soul, the entire crowd stood still on the shore, their eyes fixed on Jesus. They were waiting for something miraculous, a miracle, a new teaching, a change in their lives. But Jesus simply stood there, quietly. His gaze did not only see the people standing before him, but also looked deep into the soul of each one. He was not in a hurry, nor did he speak immediately. Instead, he observed the varied faces, the different souls, and the untold stories. Jesus understood that sometimes those who came to him were not ready for change but were being swept away by the storm within, longing for something to help them navigate the storms of life. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened," Jesus spoke, his voice like a gentle breeze, warm yet full of strength. "I will give you rest." It was an invitation, not just a simple instruction. This invitation did not come merely from easily understood words but from a presence full of love, as if he already knew the deep suffering in each person's heart. Those who came to him would find healing, not from an instant miracle but from peace within their souls. But the question remained: how many had come and gone, seeking peace but not truly opening their hearts to receive it? How many were still entangled in the storms of the soul, in doubts, fears, and pains that seemed unreachable? Jesus turned to the disciples, his gaze still calm but resolute. "You have seen me perform miracles on the sea, but the miracles in the hearts of people are what truly matter." Peter, who was always the first to ask questions, looked at Jesus and spoke, his voice tinged with some doubt. "You told us to go and bring peace to others, but how do we do that when they don't want to receive it? When they refuse to open their hearts?" Jesus smiled, not a comfortable smile but one of understanding, as if he had faced similar questions before. He did not answer immediately but allowed a moment of silence, letting the disciples feel more deeply. "Don't forget," he began, "you are not the ones bringing peace. You are the ones sharing the peace I bring. You only need to share, not force it. Peace will not always be something people receive immediately, but each time you share it, you plant a seed for change in their hearts." Jesus' answer was a gentle yet powerful reminder that they could not control how others received peace. They could only share it with humble and loving hearts. And whether others accepted it or not, their task was still to go and bring peace. At that moment, a man from the crowd stepped forward. He was a middle-aged man, his eyes filled with anxiety, but they also reflected a glimmer of hope. He looked at Jesus and spoke, "Can you help me? I've lost everything. My family, my career, everything. Feels like everything is falling apart. I don't know what to do anymore." The people around him began to whisper, but Jesus did not ignore him. He looked deeply at the man, his gaze seeming to see through all the suffering in his heart. He did not ask about the reasons, nor did he need to know the details of the losses he had endured. He simply looked into his eyes, where despair was clearly visible. "Come close to me," Jesus gently said. "I know how you feel, but I promise you, no matter what you have lost, there is one thing that can never be taken away. It is my love for you." These words, gentle yet profound, seemed to soothe the storm in the man's soul. He no longer felt abandoned, no longer felt like he was the only one drowning in pain. In this moment, he began to realize that, even though everything seemed to collapse, Jesus was the comfort, the hope, and the peace he had never known. And then, Jesus turned to look at the disciples, as though he wanted to show them a living example of how peace could spread. "Do you see now?" he asked. "Sometimes, just one word, one presence, is enough to calm the storms in a person's soul." The man bowed his head, tears beginning to fall. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of new hope. Jesus had not made him return to his old life, but he had helped him find peace within himself, in the love he brought. Chapter 6 ends in a gentle yet profound atmosphere. Each person in the crowd not only witnessed a miracle or a teaching, but began to feel the true peace that Jesus brought, not from the outside, but from within their own hearts. True love, the storm of compassion. As everything calmed down, and the people standing before Jesus began to feel peace in their hearts, a new question began to rise within them. They saw not just a man healing the body, but someone with an invisible power, a power of love, capable of changing even the driest hearts at their core. But did they have the strength to recognize that love, to truly understand that Jesus' love was not just gentleness, but a mighty force that could change the world? Jesus continued walking with the crowd, his heart overflowing with love not just for each individual, but for the suffering they were enduring. He knew that the challenges would never cease, that each one of them would face storms in life. But he also knew that, in all these storms, there was one thing that would help them stand firm, the true love he offered them. One evening, as the sun was gradually sinking behind the mountains, Jesus stopped in front of a small village, a place he had heard of for a long time, a place filled with people in pain, those who had been left behind in life. The people here were not strangers to Jesus, but they were people who had never felt the true love he brought. They had heard of the miracles he performed, but they did not understand that the greatest miracle Jesus offered was not the wonders he created, but the unconditional love he gave. As Jesus entered the village, the people began to gather around him. Some watched him from a distance, their eyes filled with doubt, questioning his sincerity. But there was one, an elderly woman, who saw him and walked closer. She said nothing, only looking at Jesus with a pleading gaze, as if she knew that only he could heal the wounds in her heart. Jesus looked into her eyes and smiled. He didn't ask her about her past, didn't need to know how much pain she had endured. He simply said one simple sentence, "Do you want to be healed?" The question was not about the body. It wasn't a question about a miracle. It was a question about the heart. Was she ready to open herself and receive true love? A love that could make all the storms in her life seem gentle? The woman lowered her head, her eyes filled with tears. At that moment, she could no longer hold it back. The storm in her heart rose, not from the external waves, but from the wounds deep within. She had lived her whole life in loneliness, in the feeling of being abandoned, in the despair that no one could understand. But now, Jesus stood there, looking at her with eyes full of love, not as a teacher, but as a friend, a companion in this painful life. "Healed?" she murmured, looking up at Jesus. "How can that be?" Jesus didn't answer immediately. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that might seem trivial to some, but was profoundly meaningful to her. That touch was not just physical comfort, but an invisible connection, a transfer of love, a healing from within. "You just need to trust," Jesus said, his voice gentle but firm. "My love can heal all, not just the body, but the soul. You will not face the storms alone anymore." The woman was overwhelmed with emotion, her heart feeling a peace she had never known before. A peace that could not be explained, not by what he did, but by his presence. She didn't need to do anything, didn't need to be worthy or prove anything. All she had to do was open her heart and accept that love. "Thank you, Lord," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me." Jesus looked at her and nodded, saying nothing more. He knew that, in that moment, she had found the peace she had been searching for her whole life, and now, she would no longer fear the storms in life. As the crowd continued their journey, each person carried within them a deep transformation. The storms didn't only come from nature, but also from within each person. But now, they knew that, no matter how fierce the winds, as long as Jesus' love was by their side, they would always stand strong. Chapter 7 closed, but the story of true love continued. Each person carried with them a message that when we can open our hearts to unconditional love, we will never have to face the storms alone. The power of faith, a promise for life. The dawn of the next day arrived, but its gentle light could not dispel the coldness within the hearts of those who had just found some peace the night before. Although Jesus had comforted them with each gentle word and loving gesture, the worries and inner storms within them had not fully calmed. The waves of life, the challenges, the suffering were still there, like dark clouds swirling in the sky of their souls. Jesus understood this. He knew that, no matter how many miracles he performed or how many lessons he taught, there would still be times when people had to face their inner storms on their own. But he also knew that when a person's heart was opened, when they allowed his love to fill their soul, they would have the strength to overcome any difficulty. That morning, as the first light of the sun filtered through the trees, Jesus stood alone, gazing into the distance, where the majestic mountains and the vast sea seemed as boundless as the worries and unanswered questions in the hearts of those around him. He stood there, alone, but felt no loneliness. In moments like these, Jesus understood that peace was not a state of indifference, but a state of absolute trust in the love of God. A love that is always present, even when we cannot see it, always there like the stars in the night sky. We cannot find peace outside ourselves, but we can only find it within our hearts. Jesus said to his disciples, his gaze still fixed on the vast sea, where the waves crashed onto the shore like the worries crashing into the human mind. Peter, always curious and eager to understand, approached him, his eyes filled with questions. "You say that peace is not something we can find outside. But how can we maintain that peace when life is full of challenges and difficulties?" Jesus smiled, a gentle smile full of affection. He did not answer immediately but quietly looked into Peter's eyes. He knew that sometimes, one can only realize the truth after going through such challenges themselves. Peace is not the absence of storms, but the ability to stand firm despite them, Jesus said. Peace is when we know that no matter what changes, no matter how fierce the challenges, there is one thing that never changes, and that is the love of God for us. His words not only resonated in the air but also deeply touched the hearts of those who stood around. Jesus was not only teaching them about peace but also about trust in something greater than the difficulties of life. It was trust in the fact that God's love can heal all wounds and calm every storm. In the days that followed, the crowd continued their journey. The storm within them had subsided, but not because life had suddenly become easier. They began to realize that, though challenges were still present, they now possessed an invisible strength in their hands. A strength born from love and trust in God. "Look at what I have done for you," Jesus said during one of his teachings, his voice soft yet powerful. "You have seen me calm the storm on the sea, but the storm within your hearts is the greatest challenge. When you trust in my love, you will overcome every trial." His words were like seeds sown into the hearts of those who listened. Those who had found peace in Jesus' love no longer feared difficulties, no longer worried about challenges. They understood that every storm in life could become a lesson, an opportunity to trust even more in true love. Chapter 8 concluded in a quiet strength. Those who followed Jesus were no longer seekers of external miracles, but those who had found the miracle within themselves, the miracle of faith and love. Steady footsteps, the love of Jesus and the faith of humanity. As the crowd continued their journey, their path became not only a physical journey but an inner one as well. Each step they took, each word of Jesus, left a mark, a subtle but powerful change in the hearts of those who listened. Those who had weathered storms with him now began to understand more deeply his love and the strength of faith. But the journey was not always smooth. In the days that followed, a great challenge arose, one that did not come from the outside but from within the hearts of those who followed him. One morning, as the group paused at a riverside village, a wave of turmoil suddenly rose within them. They began to doubt, beginning to feel that despite Jesus' great love, it might not be enough to help them overcome every trial. Some, particularly those who had endured much suffering in life, began to feel hopeless. One of them, named Nathaniel, was a man who had lived many years in loneliness and despair. He once believed that nothing could change his life, that the storms within him would never cease. When he saw others around him seemingly feeling peace in Jesus' love, he felt left behind. Despite the many miracles Jesus had performed, he still felt trapped in the storms within his heart. One day, as the group rested by the riverbank, Nathaniel approached Jesus. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say, feeling an invisible urge to seek something he had been missing for so long. Jesus noticed him and smiled. He did not ask about Nathaniel's worries, but simply asked one question. "How do you feel, Nathaniel?" Nathaniel stood still, his eyes looking down at the ground, too hesitant to meet Jesus' gaze. "You say that love can heal all, but I still don't feel peace within my heart." "Why?" Nathaniel asked, his voice full of doubt and hurt. Jesus did not rush to answer. He simply placed his hand gently on Nathaniel's shoulder and acted not just to comfort, but to bestow true peace. "Peace is not the absence of trials, Nathaniel," Jesus said. "Peace is the presence of love even when challenges arise. You may face many difficulties in life, but if you believe that God's love will guide you through the darkest times, you will find peace in every circumstance." Jesus' words were like a gentle wave, washing away the doubts in Nathaniel's heart. He didn't know how to express it, but a feeling of relief and warmth began to spread through his body. There was something in Jesus' words that made him feel that, even though things might not change immediately, at least he could believe that he would never face life storms alone. "But how can I believe when life always faces turmoil?" Nathanael asked, still filled with doubt. Faith is not something you can see immediately, Jesus replied. Faith is a choice. You choose to believe that God's love will never abandon you. And sometimes, when you can't see the way, you must trust that God has already paved a path for you, even when you don't fully understand it. His words sank deep into Nathanael's heart. He began to understand that, in life, there are many things that cannot be explained right away. But the most important thing is to have faith in a higher power, in the unconditional love that Jesus is always ready to offer. The next day, as the group continued their journey, Nathanael felt a change within himself. He no longer viewed the world through eyes filled with doubt, but began to see everything in the light of faith. The storms within him did not completely vanish, but he felt he could face them with more calmness and strength. Jesus didn't promise that we would never face storms, Nathanael thought to himself. He only promised that we would never face them alone. With each step, Nathanael's heart became stronger. He knew that no matter what challenges life brought, he would always be able to find peace in Jesus' love. For it was an eternal love that never changes. Chapter 9 ended, but the journey to seek peace and faith continued. Those who followed Jesus were no longer people seeking perfection in life, but those learning to live with trials, learning to trust in a love that would never abandon them. The journey of understanding, a new perspective on life. Day by day, the journey of Jesus and his disciples continued. Challenges still loomed. The storms of life were ever present. But with each passing day, they understood more deeply the promise of Jesus, that no matter what storms came, God's love remained steadfast, unshakable, as strong as the highest mountains. Jesus didn't just teach them how to overcome difficulties. He opened their eyes to a new way of seeing life, one that no longer merely focused on challenges and pain, but instead looked for opportunities to grow, to change, and to recognize the strength hidden deep within. One afternoon, as they passed through a small village along the path, an elderly man stepped out from his humble wooden home. He saw the group walking by, but instead of continuing on, he stopped, as if there was something very important he wished to share. Jesus recognized him, for the light in his eyes spoke of a longing to understand the deeper meanings of life. This man had suffered great loss. He once had a happy family, but a storm in his life had taken away his loved ones. Since then, he had lived in solitude, unable to believe there was anything worth hoping for. Over the long years, he searched for the meaning of life in the words of philosophers, in books, but had never found the answer he sought. One day, when he heard of Jesus, he decided to meet him, hoping to find some peace in his heart. Jesus smiled as he saw him, and as if he understood the unspoken question, he walked closer. "You have been searching for peace in your pain, haven't you?" Jesus asked, his voice gentle but full of understanding. The man looked into Jesus' eyes, his own filled with weariness and sorrow. "You are right," he replied. "I have lost everything, my family, my friends, my joy, and now I live with pains that cannot be erased. How can I find peace in a life full of such sorrow?" Jesus looked at him for a moment, his eyes full of compassion, but also resolute. He didn't answer immediately but asked another question. "Do you believe that, despite life's storms, there is still a place of safety? The man was slightly surprised by this question. A place of safety? I've searched everywhere, but there is no safe place. Every day is a new battle with pain. Jesus smiled softly, then continued, "Peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is knowing that, even in the midst of the storm, you can stand firm. You may not control what happens in your life, but you can choose how to respond. You can choose love instead of bitterness, trust instead of despair. And when you do that, you will find an invisible strength. A strength that doesn't come from people, but from God." Jesus' words were like a refreshing stream, soothing the heat of the man's soul. A part of him began to sense change. He realized that it was the trust in God's love, not the change in his circumstances, that could bring him true peace. You say we can choose how to respond to the storms. But how can I do that when the suffering is so great, so heavy? The man asked. Jesus moved closer, placing his hand on the man's shoulder, speaking in a warm, comforting tone. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me walk with you. When you know that I am always with you, that God's love is always with you, you will find the strength to face any storm." The man's eyes began to shine. Jesus' words were not just advice. They were deep truths, truths that he had been searching for over the years. He felt as though a great stone had been lifted from his heart. Part of him felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "Jesus, you don't promise that life will be free of storms," the man said, "but you promise that no matter how great the storm, I will never face it alone." The man bowed his head, a tear rolling down his cheek. "Thank you, Lord. I will remember your words." The journey of Jesus and his disciples continued, but after that encounter, the man was changed. He no longer saw life through eyes of pain and despair. He began to realize that, no matter how difficult life became, he could still choose love, choose trust, and most importantly, choose the peace that Jesus had given him. Chapter 10 ends softly but powerfully. Those who had met Jesus were no longer just people searching for salvation from the outside. They had found strength and peace within their own hearts, where love and faith in God would forever remain. The healing power of love, an unlimited invitation. After many days of travel along the rugged path, Jesus and his disciples finally arrived in a new land. It was a small village, separated from the noise of the world, yet filled with sorrowful stories that the people carried in their hearts. It seemed that everyone here bore some kind of emotional wound, pains from the past, losses they could never let go of. But in the light of Jesus, they realized that they could find healing. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jesus sat on a patch of green grass, eyes closed, to enjoy the cool breeze. The disciples sat around him, in silence, as if reflecting on the lessons they had learned during their journey. But then, a soft voice called out, breaking the stillness. It was a woman, probably in her 30s, with tired eyes and a face full of worry. She approached Jesus, her hand gently placed over her chest, as if seeking a breath of new life. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice full of pleading. Jesus looked at her, his eyes deep as though seeing into her very soul. He smiled and gestured for her to sit beside him. "You may tell me your story," Jesus said. his tone gentle and understanding. The woman sat down, looking directly into Jesus' eyes as though hoping to hear something she had never heard before. She began to speak of the suffering in her life. She had once had a happy family, a loving husband, a good son. But then, an unexpected event occurred. A storm in life that took it all away. Her husband died in an accident, and her son became gravely ill, leaving her without strength or hope. "I feel like I'm not even myself anymore," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've tried so hard, but everything seems to be against me. Each day is a battle, and I don't know what to do to feel peace anymore." Jesus listened, saying nothing, but his gaze was full of compassion. When she finished speaking, he did not hastily offer advice but simply spoke one sentence. "You do not need to heal everything on your own. Let me help you." Those words were like a beam of light piercing the darkness in her heart. She felt as though an invisible burden had been lifted from her. With just one sentence, Jesus showed her that she didn't have to face all the challenges by herself. He would be with her, guiding her through the darkest days. You have felt pain, but that doesn't mean you will have to live in suffering forever. The love of God will come to heal you, Jesus said, gently placing his hand on hers. The woman felt a warm energy flow from Jesus' hand into her own body. An unusual sense of peace filled her heart. She looked into his eyes and felt as though she had found a part of herself that she thought had been lost. "Can I believe in this love?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Jesus smiled and nodded. "You do not need to understand everything. Just believe that the love of God can change everything. That love will bring healing not only to you, but to all who come to him with a sincere heart." The woman sat quietly, her eyes gradually brightening. She realized that, though life might not be perfect and though she still had many challenges ahead, she no longer had to bear all the pain on her own. The love of God would always be a refuge, a comfort in times of hardship. After their encounter, the woman left with a lighter heart, full of hope and trust in a new future. She knew that, no matter how difficult things got, she would never have to face them alone. The love of God would always be there, ready to heal and bring peace. Chapter 11 ends with a profound message about healing. The woman's story is a testament to the unconditional nature of God's love. That love does not discriminate or seek conditions. It simply waits to be received with an open heart. The voyage into the storm, a lesson in faith and resilience. The journey of Jesus and his disciples continued relentlessly, like the flow of a river that never turns back. After days of teaching and deep conversations, Jesus once again led his disciples to the sea, where the winds still blew strong and the waves still rolled. But this time, it was not a sudden storm, but a lesson in faith, resilience, and the unseen power of belief. One evening, as dark clouds began to gather, the wind blew fiercely, as though something was about to happen. Jesus told the disciples to board a boat, and they would cross the lake to reach a village on the other side. The disciples were familiar with life on the sea. They were not afraid of storms. But this time, everything was different. As the boat reached the middle of the lake, the sky suddenly darkened, and strong winds began to blow. Waves crashed against the side of the boat, and water started to pour in. The disciples began to panic. Though they had seen many storms in their lives, this time was different. The sea rose higher, and the waves were so strong that they felt the boat might capsize at any moment. "Where is Jesus?" one of the disciples asked anxiously. And when they looked back where Jesus had been sitting, they saw him still calmly lying on a cushion, fast asleep as if nothing was happening. "How can he sleep? We're in danger," another disciple cried out. What they didn't realize was that, while the disciples panicked and feared for their lives, Jesus, though asleep, was filled with peace in his heart. He was not afraid of the storm, because he knew that no matter how fierce the waves, God always had a plan and protection. When the biggest wave struck, the disciples could no longer endure it. They rushed to wake Jesus. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus slowly woke up, not in the least bit fearful. He stood, looked toward the storm, and with a simple command he spoke, "Be still, be quiet." Immediately, the wind ceased, and the waves calmed. The sky cleared, and the sea became peaceful again. The disciples stood there, unable to believe their eyes. They had witnessed a miracle unlike any other. Jesus looked at them, and with a calm voice he asked, "Why are you so afraid? How is it that you have no faith?" The disciples looked at each other, stunned. They had seen many miracles, but this was the first time they had seen Jesus command nature, controlling both the wind and the sea. They felt both amazed and ashamed for their fear in the midst of the storm. "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" one of the disciples asked in awe. Jesus did not answer directly but simply looked at them with gentle eyes, as if to teach them a profound lesson about faith and resilience in life. He did not tell them that they would never face storms, but he wanted them to understand that, no matter how strong the storms might be, the peace and strength that come from faith would help them overcome everything. After the storm, everything returned to calm. The sea was as blue as if there had never been a storm. The disciples sat in silence, reflecting on what had just happened. They realized that, in life, we cannot avoid challenges and storms, but faith in God will be the strength that helps us overcome all things. This journey, though difficult, taught the disciples a valuable lesson. Faith in God is not about expecting a life free from hardship, but about trusting that, no matter how fierce the storm, God is always with us, protecting and guiding us. Chapter 12 ends in silence, but it leaves a profound mark on the hearts of those who followed Jesus. Each of them carried with them a new lesson. Faith in God will help them overcome every challenge in life. Finding truth in silence. A meeting with the watchman. The next day, as the light of dawn began to break, the disciples continued their journey with Jesus. But in their hearts, the emotions from the previous night still lingered, after the storm had passed, leaving not only peace but also a profound lesson in faith and resilience. However, this journey was not just about miracles or overcoming storms. It was also about encounters full of hidden meaning with people who carried their own stories, their daily struggles and pains. They stopped at a small seaside village, where a man lived alone in a small house. He was one of the people the townspeople called a watchman, living on the outskirts of society for reasons that no one could fully understand. Everyone in the village avoided him, for he always appeared strange, sometimes saying things others could not comprehend. But Jesus never viewed anyone in this way. He saw in each person a story, a life full of meaning. As Jesus and his disciples entered the village, the watchman stood alone by the sea, gazing at the horizon as if waiting for something. The waves gently lapped the shore, but he did not move. Jesus gently walked up to him, said nothing, just stood beside him, sharing the stillness of the moment. Finally, the watchman spoke, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "Why have you come here? Aren't you a man of peace?" he asked, his tone full of suspicion. Jesus smiled and looked into his eyes, not judging, not responding immediately. He simply said, "Sometimes, peace does not come from seeking a place, but from realizing that peace has always been inside us, even when we feel alone or rejected." The watchman fell silent. He did not respond right away, but something in those words made him pause and think. Jesus sat down beside him, and the disciples quietly sat as well. Only the sound of the waves could be heard, like a peaceful melody in the midst of the stillness. After a long while, the watchman looked up, his eyes suddenly bright as if he had seen something he had never thought of before. "Can you help me?" he asked, his eyes filled with longing. Jesus smiled and nodded. "You have suffered, haven't you? But remember, healing comes from the realization that you are not meant to endure alone." The watchman felt a strange sense of relief. He no longer felt cast out, no longer felt like an outsider in the community. Jesus had brought him a new sense of hope, that even though life might never return to what it was before, he no longer had to feel alone. He would always be there with unconditional love. The group continued sitting by the sea, where the waves gently rolled in, and Jesus continued to teach. His words were not just dry teachings, but a blend of love, understanding, and healing. Every word, every action he took opened new doors in the hearts of those listening, helping them realize that they were not alone in this life, that God was always with them, no matter where they were or what circumstances they faced. This journey through the village was not just a physical one, but also a profound spiritual journey, where people could find healing for their souls, peace in their minds, and faith in the good things ahead. Jesus did not just teach the disciples about miracles, but also how to live in harmony with themselves and with those around them. Chapter 13 ends with a peaceful image. The watchman was no longer standing alone by the sea, but had merged into the community, finding empathy and connection. The villagers also began to realize that differences should not be feared but are part of the diverse tapestry of life. Peace is not about avoiding challenges but the ability to face them and find understanding within those difficulties. The road to Jericho, a lesson in mercy. Each step with Jesus is a step toward deeper understanding and faith in God. His journey was not just about miracles or profound stories, but a life deeply connected to those who had been abandoned and forgotten by society. This time, Jesus and his disciples were traveling a long road to the city of Jericho, a city filled with stories of suffering, poverty, and people cast aside by society. It was a place Jesus wanted to visit, to teach his disciples an important lesson in mercy. As they passed through a desolate area on the trail leading to Jericho, an unexpected scene appeared. A blind man sat by the side of the road, his hand raised as though he was asking for help. People passed by without noticing him, as if he did not exist. But Jesus, as he walked past, stopped. He looked at the man with compassionate eyes and spoke in a warm voice. "Do you want to see?" Jesus asked gently. The blind man, though unable to see, heard the question and, in Jesus' voice, sensed something special. He lifted his head, filled with hope, and responded, "Master, I want to see." Jesus did not answer immediately but knelt down close to him, gently touching his eyes. He did not perform the miracle to prove his power, but because he wanted to bring new life to him, to restore the hope that the man had long lost. "Have faith," Jesus said, and immediately, the blind man opened his eyes, seeing the light for the first time after so many years of darkness. Tears of joy streamed down his face. The disciples stood in awe. They had never witnessed a miracle like that. But Jesus did not stop there. He did not just heal the man's eyes. He healed his soul, helping him realize that the eyes were not the only thing that needed to be opened. Spiritual insight and faith were what mattered most. This was not just a miracle, but a lesson in mercy and unconditional love. In a world full of people who had been cast aside, Jesus came to seek and to heal, not because he wanted people to worship him, but because he wanted them to realize that God's love for them is boundless, without conditions. The people of Jericho began gathering around Jesus, eager to hear his teachings, wanting to learn about the love and healing he brought. The sick, the sinners, and those living on the margins of society all sought him, knowing that there was only one place where they could find true healing, where Jesus was. Jesus sat down in the midst of the crowd, his disciples around him, and began teaching about love, mercy, and forgiveness. He spoke of those who needed salvation, of those who had no one to advocate for them. He did not only teach about sacrifice, but also about forgiveness and the openness of the heart. "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," Jesus said when a woman caught in adultery was brought before him. His words silenced everyone, and no one dared to throw a stone. Jesus not only preached love but practiced his words. He forgave the woman and taught everyone, "Go and sin no more." Chapter 14 ends with a scene filled with light and hope. Those who followed Jesus came not just to seek miracles, but to find a new way of life, a life filled with mercy and forgiveness. Jesus was not only a healer of the body but also the bringer of peace to the soul. Those who encountered him, whether they were the sick, the sinners, or the outcasts, found salvation and comfort in his teachings. Each encounter, each miracle that Jesus performed, was not only proof of his infinite power but also an opportunity for people to better understand God's love and forgiveness, that no matter how much they had fallen, they could always return. True healing, the introduction of the Great Shepherd. Jesus always knew how to bring comfort to those in need, even in the most difficult of circumstances. But he never stopped at just physical healing. He always emphasized that true healing comes not only from restoring health but also from healing the wounds of the soul. One day, as he and his disciples passed through a small village near the sea, a paralyzed man had heard of Jesus and the miracles he had performed. He could not move on his own to get close to him, but his love for the Lord and the faith in his heart inspired his friends to take bold action. They brought him near where Jesus was teaching, even climbing onto the roof to lower him down right in front of the crowd on a bed. The people around saw this scene with amazement. Some in the crowd began to whisper, thinking that the actions of the man's friends were too bold, but Jesus saw the strong faith within them. He turned to the paralyzed man and said something that amazed everyone. "Son, your sins are forgiven." Immediately, the crowd began to murmur. They could not understand why Jesus said this. They thought that he could only heal the body, but forgiving sins was the right of God alone. Some of the priests who were nearby began to criticize him, thinking that Jesus was blaspheming. But Jesus, undisturbed by their criticism, continued teaching with a strange calmness, as though he knew there was an important lesson to teach everyone. "Why are you thinking these things in your hearts?" he asked them, which is easier, to say, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up and walk"? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He turned to the paralyzed man and said, "Get up, take your bed, and go home." Immediately the paralyzed man stood up, took his bed, and went straight home. Everyone around him was amazed, looking at each other in disbelief. The crowd went silent, stunned by a miracle that was beyond anything they had ever seen. But for Jesus, this was not just a miracle of the body. It was a confirmation of his power to forgive and heal the suffering souls. Healing from the inside is what Jesus wanted to emphasize. He knew that there were wounds that the eye could not see, pains in the heart that no one could feel. The love and forgiveness of God are essential in helping people heal from deep within their souls. Jesus did not come just to heal physical ailments, but also to help everyone realize that the forgiveness and love of God could bring total freedom. Chapter 16 concludes with a deep understanding of the power and love of Jesus. He was not only a teacher but also a savior, healing not just the body but also the soul. Jesus taught us that no matter how painful and challenging life may be, we can always find comfort in God's unconditional love. That love not only heals suffering bodies but also brings peace to the heart, helping us realize that no matter how many times we fall, we can always get back up and continue our journey. Let the teachings of Jesus be an inspiration in your life. Don't let pain or wounds in your heart hold you back. Let the love of God heal everything. Every day, no matter how hard it may get, remember that Jesus is always ready to open his arms and guide you through all the storms of life.